said that the self is the center of gravitational narration. And so it's this idea it's a gravitational center of storytelling. So all the stories we tell. And,
Mm-hmm.
in the two books, I talk a lot about how the left brain creates all these stories. But the self is like the story behind the stories. The left brain is a storyteller, so it
Mm-hmm.
creates all these stories. But the right brain is really far more into reality. And in fact, it has a very important job he refers to as the devil's advocate. And
Now let's
so
talk about
it's
that.
it yeah, so the left brain stories, if they get too out of line with reality, then the right brain steps in.
Huh.
And it steps in and it corrects the left brain. You're not the inner voice. So why do you care what it does?
Hello, Chris.
Hi,
Lovely to meet you.
it's great to meet you.
And thank you for joining me on this podcast. And guys, today I'm talking to Chris Niebauer. You may know him from the famous book, No Self, No Problem. And this channel is very much about the no self, no problem. So I think Chris is the perfect guy to have a chat. And well, Chris is a really interesting guy. And you may watch some of his videos on YouTube, and probably you already seen them. He's a professor, and he wrote another couple of books. And today I want to share the space with you and see where it takes us.
Sure, sounds like it'll be fun.
Great. So the podcast is called Awakening Now. And I would like to know your definition of awakening. What is awakening? What is awakening from? To? What's the whole thing? Can you let us know?
Sure. I'm actually working on a new book, and the title is Waking Up from the Dream of Thinking. And so the stuff I typically I start off with the no self, straight from Buddhism, and a little bit of Hinduism, and step back a little bit more. So if the self is an illusion, what other things are illusions? And the left brain, the self is just one example of what the left brain does in terms of creating kind of a linguistic fantasy or linguistic illusion. And it turns out modern humans live in a lot of different illusions, mostly caused by what the left brain does in terms of thinking. And it's very easy to get caught up in these. Work. One of the ones I like to talk a lot about is ownership. We buy into ownership. There's this amazing illusion that 1% of the world owns 50% of the world's wealth. But this tricky thing about ownership is you can't become conscious of it. You could try right now. You could say, well, why do I own anything? You could find pieces of paper that have words on them. But that's clearly just some other social agreement that we have. There's no physicality. There's no conscious experience that one can have of ownership. And so that is one of these other illusions. And when we talk about awakening, what we awaken from is a dream of the thought world, a world that was based in left brain linguistics. And this is fine. Language is a useful tool. It can actually help us navigate through the world. But what we've done, what modern humans have done, is we've taken it a step further. We've gone a little bit more asleep in this dream of thinking, where words themselves become realities. And this started everything really changed just a couple hundred years ago. And I think it's the book Sapiens. It's a wonderful story about a car company, Peugeot, this car company, and how the person who started it just had a kind of interesting idea, like, well, why don't I just create this fiction on paper called a company? And it was a very ingenious thing to do, because if he got in trouble, he just blamed the company. But the company had no physicality to, there were buildings, but it was really a legal agreement. So it didn't have any real existence to it. It just, people bought into it. And we do the same thing. Modern humans, we go to work and we take our work we bring our work home, which is a weird thing. And so we think about work even when we're at home, and you can be out on your patio. It's a beautiful day, but then thoughts of work intrude, and suddenly, you start to worry and stress out. And so waking up from the dream of thinking is all about really just awakening to the power, this kind of abstract thought world created mostly by the left brain, how much power it has over modern humans, and how problematic it is. And when you stop thinking, not only does the self-illusion disappear, but all the I problems associated with it, all the problems seem to disappear as soon as you stop thinking.
Wonderful. Yes. It's such a alluring place, this mind. I say it's like a story park. You wake up here on this planet, and here you are in a story park. One story ends, another finishes, and then here you go again.
Yeah,
So one
the
of these
stories.
big stories is that there is the self here, or like inside the body, or inside the brain, or inside somewhere that is running the show. But it has never been found, right?
No, it has never been found. In fact, just for your listeners, so there's different ways we can show the self-illusion. And some people have, and certainly in No Self, No Problem, I take an approach based in Buddhism that, the self has no stability to it. It's not the stable thing we think it is. And that's a very easy thing to show because the self is changing all the time. So, I put on one self right now, and that'll change 2 hours from now, and then that self will change. It's continuously changing. So there's no stability to it. And of course, the free will problem, so many modern people they suffer over intrusive thoughts. But if the self were real, then it would just turn these off. It would just say, I don't want to think this anymore. And you would just turn it off. And so it's been argued that because there's no stability, because there's no free will, the self is an illusion. But I think it can get a little easier than that, because if you consciously explore reality and take a sip of your tea and you say, well, that's real. It's here, it's now, and it's a direct conscious experience. I'm going to take a sip of my tea too.
What tea do you have?
Just green tea.
Oh, I have black tea with lemon.
It's good too. And it's a wonderful, rich, conscious experience. And you say, okay, well, can I experience the self in the same way that I can experience tea or a sunny day? And you could explore and explore, and you're like, oh, well, I could see my hands. Okay, but can you see who owns these hands? Supposedly there's this little self that owns this meat suit. And so, can you find the owner? And you can keep exploring this, and you can explore and explore. And as it turns out, in the same way that we can't find the self in the brain, you can't even experience the self.
Right.
So
it begs a question then. What is this self? And how is it experienced, and how is it believed if it's not even there? When we say word self, it may mean different things for different people. How would you say, what is this mysterious self?
The self is a linguistic trick. It's a trick of language. And we fall for a lot of tricks of language. I wish I could remember the origins of this. It's a wonderful phrase. It came up in one of the Zen books. It was, I can use words without being fooled by them. And it's a wonderful way to put it, because words are useful tools. We're chatting right now, and we can, as long as we're pointing to realities, like before I used the word tea, and you really knew what I meant, and you got your tea, and so it's a very effective way to communicate. But modern humans, we've fallen into this linguistic story, this linguistic fiction, and now there are all kinds of words out there that actually don't mean a thing. Like the self doesn't really mean anything. Right. It doesn't mean anything. We can't find it. We can't point to it. We can't consciously experience it. But if you fall for it, these stories have a certain reality. Like any story, you pick up a Stephen King novel, you start reading, and the story sort of comes to life. And that's one of the blessings, but also curses of being a modern human. We've gotten so talented with language, but then we take the story seriously. See, if a story is recognized for what it was, for what it is, like you said, what is awakening? That's recognizing a story for what it is, a story.
Right.
And selves are useful stories. So I pay my bills, you pay your bills. I'll get in my car. I mean, which obviously it's not really my car, but well, let's play this game. I'll get into my car. I'll go to this place. I'll do some things. They pay me, and and that all could be a very useful game. You ever hear the tragedy of the commons? It was um, this idea that like if there's just a big uh, piece of land, and say there's 10 farmers, they might all use the land, overuse it, and then the land becomes worthless. But if you create this illusion of a self and you say, I'm going to give you this little piece of land and it's yours, then they'll take better care of it. Because this idea like, oh, it's mine, I don't want to ruin it. And it's the same thing we do. Think about how you treat a rented car versus one that's yours. You treat your car pretty well, but you just bang up, if it's a rental, what do you care? And so in that sense, the self could be a useful illusion. And so it could actually solve some problems. But that's all it is. It's just a story.
So
there's
do you think we got this idea of self to take better care of bodies? This is my body.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And that illusion and that sense of ownership, again, it's totally illusory. But if you buy into it, at least even on a superficial level, yeah, you'll take better care of your body. You'll take better care of the stuff you own. And so there's a certain
Not
sense where it
rented.
works. Yeah. And it works. And so, but the trick is, and it's a subtle difference between using the illusion and letting that illusion use you. And that's all the difference between finding peace, having a very fun time while we're here, and having a panic attack. When you look at anxiety and depression, these all stem around taking the self seriously as if it's a thing. And people use these phrases. They say, I am depressed. That's a very, I'd be very cautious about using language in that way, because you're stating that there's an I, and that somehow that self is in a state of anxiety or a state of depression. And I think it'd be much more useful to think of it almost metaphorically. And so our moods may fluctuate, but it'd be more useful to say, well, there's a little downness today. Instead of saying I am depressed. When you say I am depressed, you're creating this story, but taking it seriously, and then imposing some state on it as if it could be depressed. It's a much more playful, non-serious way to go about it if you don't take the story seriously and just, oh, there's a little downness today, or maybe there's some upness, there's a good feeling going on right now. And so I'm very cautious about how we use the language of I. It's a very powerful thing. And so it's more useful to get playful with it. And that's all the difference between a left brain, which is terribly serious about particularly language, grammar, there's all these rules, and the right brain, which seems to be a lot more playful. And it also seems to be more in touch with what we call reality rather than these stories about reality.
Yeah. Because these people that believe that there is the I, me, in charge and control, it's so difficult for them to approach this question in a playful way because that I is so serious. And what if I disappear? Or what if my story is no longer here? Or what if I lose my identity? Can we talk about identity? What is identity? And how does that show up and play out?
I like the way Daniel Dennett put it. So he was probably the greatest living philosopher. He just passed very recently, just maybe a few months ago. And Daniel Dennett said that the self is the center of gravitational narration. And so this idea, like, it's a gravitational center of storytelling. So all the stories we tell, And, in the two books, I talk a lot about how the left brain creates all these stories. But the self is like the story behind the stories. And I love the way you put it there, because as soon as we buy into the story, the first thought is what happens to the story when it's gone. What's going to happen to the story? And that creates all kinds of fear and anxiety, and gets us living into a future, which is another story. And so, I would say the self is the story behind most of the other stories. And so there is something special to that story. And it's if you consider all the problems, and again, we have to word it in a certain way, the problems, your problems, because it is interesting, because I could ask your listeners, okay, the last time you were very anxious and worried about things, what were you worried about? Did you worry about someone else's problems? Someone across the globe? Were you worrying about their problems, or were you worrying about your problems? And so that story of the self, it's like a magnet. It attracts eye problems, problems. And when we look at what the left brain does, and so Gazzaniga and the people who did all the split brain research, that they really discovered the function of the left brain is this interpretations. In fact, even called the left brain the interpreter. And so it's trying to figure out the world. It's trying to create hypotheses to figure out what's going on. And that's what the self is. It's just, so I see this hand moving and I hear speech coming out. And so the left brain creates an idea. Well, maybe there's a self. But it also ends up creating a lot of problems, because it looks around and it creates interpretations like, do I have enough money? How successful am I? And what's going to become of all this? And so it creates, maybe I'll be a failure, maybe I'll be successful. And it's interesting, because all of these stories, they come as the inner voice. And so this is really your left brain. It doesn't just talk to other people. It actually creates an inner voice. And it turns out the research is pretty clear on this, that inner voice is the main cause of intrusive thoughts. And so it could be a beautiful day. Everything's perfect. Nature, consciousness, everything is just perfect as it is. But then this intrusive thought comes. And that's that interpretive left brain. It's trying to generate hypotheses about what might happen. Oh, that presentation tomorrow is just going to be dreadful. Oh, that email I sent, I'm going to get in so much trouble over that. And what I ask people to do, I think it's a pretty useful little project, is to test it out. So every time you have an intrusive thought, if make a note of it, and make a note, and particularly see how confident you are in it. So if it says, that email I sent, I'm definitely going to get in trouble at work tomorrow, and then write that out, and then how confident you are. And maybe you'll say, this is a 9 out of 10. I'm very, very confident that this is going to turn out. And that's why I have so much anxiety right now. What you will find, and I've done this with students for years, what you'll find is that the highest rate of accuracy of our inner voice trying to predict the future is about 50%.
That's still a lot.
Well, that was the absolute highest. Most people, it was so horrible. It was maybe 1 out of 10 times it would be right. It was far more wrong than it was right. And so this left brain interpreter has a certain survival mechanism to it. So it's sort of always looking on the negative side, because for survival, it's much better to be overly cautious. And so once you recognize how off it is, then you take it less seriously. So you could be laying in bed and you could hear the voice, and it will start telling these dreadful stories, but you don't take them as seriously anymore. You're like, oh, that's just my left brain doing its thing. And as soon as you unplug the seriousness of it, it's no longer energized. And it's a very interesting thing you can observe. And for some people, it takes a couple of years. For some people, it happens very quickly. It just sort of fades out. And so we stop talking to ourselves all the time.
Yeah. I'm curious now about your story. How did you come to this recognition, realization, whatever you want to call it, awakening? What happened?
Well, in the book, I talk about how my father died when I was just my first year of college, and it threw me into a really intense state of anxiety and panic. Most of it was this death, thoughts of just horrific things. And like, even if I was like right now, I'm having a conversation with you, and that's at the center of my consciousness. But back then, I would have maybe 10% where I could talk to people. And most of my consciousness was so into that inner voice. And this is going to go wrong. This is going to, something, it was just one continuous state of anxiety. And that's pretty dreadful. It's a rough way to, to live. And there was a point of surrender where I recognized that my anxiety was me not wanting to be anxious. In other words, there's a very interesting way the inner voice works.
Mm-hmm.
The more you fight it, the more energized it becomes. When you finally let your guard down and just let it do it. So Nisargadatta has a great way of putting it. So Ramana Maharshi also talked about this. He said, you're not the inner voice. So why do you care what it does? And that's a great piece of advice I wish I would have read when I was 20, because as soon as you recognize that you're not the inner voice and stop fighting it, then it takes its power away. And so I just had a moment of giving up, and I said, I don't care anymore. Do your worst. I just don't care anymore. And all of a sudden the inner voice became quiet. And I thought, well, that's really interesting. And I had recognized that I was generating this all by trying to escape it. And so that set me on this path. And I was reading Alan Watts, and he's probably my favorite philosopher, and he had a huge influence over me. And of course, to discover that he had talked about this, I ended up calling it the law of opposition. That whenever we, force something, often the opposite happens. It's like the same thing that happens in sports. Someone is an expert, they can make this shot in their sleep, but now all of a sudden the game depends on it, and they have to make this shot, and then they end up freezing and they miss. And so, they miss a shot that they could make very, very easily. And it's because that nature of opposition, or, it could even be easier. Like, you have to get up early. And so you try to go to sleep, and you're like, I really need to go to sleep. Well, you just made a recipe. You're going to be up all night.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's, some occasion where you have to stay up all night, you end up falling asleep. And so it's the same thing, you try not to be anxious, and that makes you anxious. But if you give up on the whole game and you just say, well, I'm not any of this, and you just sort of sit back and watch the show, it unplugs that reactivity and how the left brain and the inner voice work.
Oh, that's very interesting. Like, you really need to become a martial artist of Aikido, where you just meet whatever is here. And it's just, rather than fight it.
Yeah, that's Aikido. Yeah, I mean, you don't fight the energy, you don't hit it, you just redirect it, and then it ends up kind of losing its own power over time, and so it's very non-confrontational. There's no enemy to defeat, and so I think that's Aikido's. In fact, it reminded me. So I did martial arts most of my life, and I can remember the first match I had, and I wasn't thinking, and I very quickly went in and got a point. But then my left brain kicked in, and I started hearing this: "Oh, you're going to win. You're really good, and you're going to win this match." And all of a sudden, I lost the point. And then I lost another, and then I lost the match. And it was because I turned to the inner voice instead of being the awareness that was doing the match.
Mm. Yeah, this problem, big problem.
I would say it's the main problem modern humans face. And in both of the books, I talk about the Pirahã. And because they're a small tribe in South America, and they very much live like our ancestors. They're hunter-gatherers. And the most fascinating thing about them, so they were studied. Dan Everett was a linguist, and he ended up spending most of his life living with them. And they've got some very interesting things about language, because they kind of sing their language, which suggests, a lot of right hemisphere is involved. But the most impressive thing about this culture is they lived in the immediate now. And so they were not interested in the past. They had no creation stories. They have zero interest in how they got there.
Wow.
They don't tell their kids stories. Everything is about the immediate present moment. And it turns out they're the happiest people on the planet. And so when people visit, the remarkable thing is even though they deal with hardships that most of us couldn't imagine,
Hmm.
they die very early, no medical interventions, um, no technology. But at the same time, they are so obviously happy. Westerners, when they meet these people, they're like, everyone's laughing, everyone's smiling. Like, what kind of secret did these people have? And the secret is they're just not thinking. They're actually in reality. They're experiencing reality as it happens rather than getting caught up in that inner voice. And
Hmm.
so it's kind of one of those messages we should, you know, like, look, we've discovered this. Here's a group of people who are facing real problems, malaria, things that will kill you, and then they do. But at the same time, they're blissfully happy. And in fact, there's a really good article on this. And it's free online. So I suggest your listeners just check it out. It's called "A Wandering Mind is an Unhappy Mind."
Uh-huh.
And what they discovered is we spend about half of our waking day in that inner voice, just drifting from reality into some inner fantasy or thinking, well, this thing will happen or that thing will happen. And they played with the statistics a little bit. And what they were able to show is that the more time you spend in that inner fantasy world, the less happy you are.
Wow.
And so the Pirahã are blissfully happy because
Uh-huh.
they're in reality. Reality is and this is the thing. When you stop thinking, you immediately recognize how joyful existence is. It's a very um, peaceful, joyful place. Just taking a sip of your tea can really be like it.
Hmm.
And but then for modern humans, we let the thinking mind take over. And most people, we could probably think maybe an hour, probably less than an hour a day, maybe less than that. And so there's stories like, I don't know if you've uh, listened to Gary Weber
Oh,
talk.
yeah. Hmm.
And he talks about how this voice in the head just shut off completely. And
Hmm.
yet he's running these companies and it had no effect. He was able to keep his job. He was effectively running companies and he just had no inner voice. And so it's really like the appendix. Like we don't really need an appendix now. We probably don't really need the inner voice at all. And would probably be much happier without it.
Hmm. Now, hearing this, many people will think that mind is wrong, thinking is wrong. How to shut it off? Do you have any exercise or any advice? Well,
Oh
firstly,
yeah,
of course, it's not an enemy, it's just part of evolution and it's here for a reason. So it's not a bad thing. It's just been taken for something that is not.
exactly. And again, if you fight it, it's going to defeat you. It's a very powerful mechanism.
Hmm.
People with anxiety, people who have a panic attack is basically trying to fight the mind. And if you fight it, it's going to increase its power over you. And so
Oh,
in
wow.
that, it's that Wu Wei, this like no effort that was discovered long ago in the East that uh, you don't fight it. But and again, you can recognize it's not you, and so there are tricks like that. But I think one of the first ways to uh, I don't know, it'll not eliminate thinking, but recognize that your reality is far beyond thought, is to catch the moments when you're not thinking. And so I got an exercise.
Okay.
Susan Blackmore is a famous consciousness researcher, and she has her students. They do this uh, practice where they would make little post-it notes, and it would say, "Was I conscious right now? Was I conscious?" And I don't, I, I think we're always I mean, there's no other way to
Hmm.
know reality outside of consciousness. So I played with that a little bit. And I had my students write out little post-it notes, but it was I thinking just now? And you
Mm-hmm.
sort of put these all over the place. And what you recognize is that we have moments of blissful, conscious awareness. Like you get up and you walk outside and you just feel the warmth of the sun. And it's a wonderful moment. But then the thinking mind turns on. And then it starts becoming judgmental and it kind of ignores that and it gets involved in problems. So the first step is to recognize how often you're not thinking and how peaceful those moments are. So that's the trick of thinking. It's kind of like uh, someone who comes to a party and they show up late, but in their mind, the party only started when they got there. And so the thinking mind, it doesn't buy into other conscious states. And so unless the thinking mind is on, it devalues every other conscious state. So the thinking
Mm-hmm.
mind has this impression that it's somehow the CEO and that
Mm-hmm.
no real business takes place unless I'm here. But the truth is, we have many moments throughout our day where we are peaceful, we are blissful. It's just it's a state of awakening. But then the thinking mind turns on and it sort of wipes the slate clean. And so the first trick is to recognize those moments where you're already where you're trying to go.
Very good. I like that. It's happening all the time. It's just not noticed because that mind is always looking for something wrong. And it would just dismiss that, even though there is a silence while, cooking or washing dishes, or maybe creating some piece of art or whatever. It's not recognized because there is no talking.
Your listeners probably heard the expression, you're already a Buddha, you just don't know it.
Ah,
And we're already there. We just don't know it because the clouds of thinking, it's like the sun is always shining, but when the clouds are there, it makes it look like the sun isn't shining. But those clouds are just thoughts. And so we're always shining. It's just those thoughts make it seem like we're not. And so recognize there are all kinds of moments that are blissfully happy. Start to recognize them. That's a good place to start because the connection will be made and recognize when thought takes over that it's not a peaceful place because thought is all about solving problems. I mean, that's why it evolved. It's a problem solver.
Well,
And
first it needs to create the problems, then it solves them. And
yeah,
then
well,
it gets either happy or unhappy.
and yeah, I mean, there are little things that come up during the day where uh, it's useful, and if some kind of little thing comes out, the thinking mind turns on, solves the problem. It's just for us modern humans, we never turn it off. And that's that image, that power of the self, it comes on. And again, the self, it could come maybe here and there, maybe half an hour a day. I think you could get by with less than that. Um, but we have it on far more than we have to.
I agree. This is fascinating. So, in terms of left brain, okay, it's creating all these stories, and the right brain is creating all the images, right? Is that how it is? The images, the
Mental pictures,
yeah, the mental pictures.
yeah, and there's some evidence that the right brain does that, but I think so. If you look at, there's a famous neuroscientist, V.S. Ramachandran, and he has a really nice way to look at the left and right brain. How the left brain is a storyteller, so it creates all these stories, but the right brain is really far more into reality. And in fact, it has a very important job he refers to as the devil's advocate. And
Now let's
so
talk about that.
yeah, so the left brain stories, if they get too out of line with reality, then the right brain steps in.
Huh.
And it steps in and it corrects the left brain. And the interesting thing from that perspective is people with right brain damage. So what happens when we lose this devil's advocate that's in touch with reality? Well, our stories become absolutely absurd. And so these patients will tell these stories like they'll be totally paralyzed. So again, since we're cross-wired, if you have a massive stroke in the right brain, most of the left side of the body will be paralyzed. But here's the trick with that. when a person has damage to the right brain, it also takes out this devil's advocate. And so they no longer question the stories of the left brain, and the left brain is free to confabulate. And what we do, what we see is an exaggerated version of us. So we make up stories all the time and believe them. But in these patients, the stories become like I could get up and walk if I wanted, or I could, their paralyzed hand is sitting there and they just say, well, I could move it if I wanted, but I just don't want to. And in one case, I thought it was particularly interesting. Ramachandran said, well, if you could move your left hand, touch my nose. And the patient hallucinated. She goes, I'm touching your nose right now. And so that shows us the power of these left brain stories. Without the right brain to step in, our stories become extremely outrageous and certainly out of touch with reality. What you can see, like ordinary people, we do the same thing. We think like companies, we think they're real. We think the self was, and those are sort of along the same line. It's just in these patients, it's much more extreme.
So what we need to do then is, as a humans, as a humanity, to lift up the right brain's ability to question all these stories and bring the left brain down into reality as much as possible. Because the biggest story is that there is the self, or there is me, I in control, deciding, making choices and perceiving this world. But then the right brain, for some reason, doesn't correct that.
Exactly. Yeah, and you put it really nicely. That's exactly what modern humans need, is that right brain to step in and correct some of these stories. And sometimes it happens with altered states of consciousness. So if you've ever heard the story of Ram Dass, how he tells like he had taken all these stories very seriously. He's a professor, and you could even see old pictures of Richard Allport, who he was before this awakening, and he had a tie, looked very serious, and then all of a sudden that story collapsed. And in a way, that is like the right brain came in and said, "Oh, this story, there's not a whole lot to it," and all of a sudden the story just faded and it broke apart into fiction, and that was a life-changing experience for him.
I'm also curious about, we have the mind, right? We have the heart, the center of being, the seat of consciousness, or whatever you want to call it. So is the right side corresponding more to the heart, which is openness, compassion, happiness, peace? Or is it something else?
Well, there's a couple areas in the right brain that seem to be connected with the emotions of others and the perspective of others. So when we look at what compassion and empathy in particular, there's a part, it's you could point to it. It's the right temporal parietal junction. And it doesn't seem to have much of a function other than taking the perspective of other people, which is really what we would say empathy is. And the interesting thing is, like, you can go into the lab and they can hit this with a really strong magnetic energy, and it will disrupt it for a while. And once that happens, people become completely non-empathic. They just can't take the perspective of another person. And as soon as it comes back on again, then it works. So there is something with the right brain that seems to connect us with other people. And of course, that's part of the practices of most religions, and certainly Buddhism, and we practice empathy. And of course, the right brain is also dominant for emotions in general. And so one of the things that happens with right brain damage is the patient becomes emotionally flat. And so you put those two together, and it really is that emotional connection with other people that's through the right brain. And so in both of the books, I have practices. So if the right brain does empathy and compassion, how do we crank this up a little bit?
Yeah. So how do we boost the right brain and so it becomes more online? Do you have any exercises?
Yeah, sure. And in fact, some people are probably already doing these, because one of the things about the left brain is its attention is very narrow. And that's what all caught up with language. So right now I'm talking one word at a time. And this is how the left brain works, one thing at a time. The right brain's attention is much more vast. And so one of the practices of meditation to get your right brain going, it's one of my favorite meditative practices, is say you're outside, that you actually could be anywhere, and you may notice one sound, but then just imagine your awareness just ever increasing. And then so maybe there's some birds in this tree and they're kind of singing, but then you notice some other sounds, some other winds or animals making a little bit of noise. And so you just keep, how many things can you pay attention to at once? And what that does is it gets because that's what the right brain does. It's simultaneously processing everything all at once.
Oh,
And so if you could feel your awareness just expanding and expanding, you'd be absolutely amazed at how many things you could simultaneously pay attention to. And one other version of this that a lot of people are already doing is music. And so the very interesting thing about music is how right-brained it is. Because when you listen to music, there's lyrics, but there's also multiple instruments, and they're all going at once.
mhm.
And so it's that simultaneous processing that's connected to the right brain. And so I did a exercise one time. It was just very spontaneous with my class. I said, what does music mean to me? And then write an essay on it. And I got these fascinating, long essays where people were, I mean, in love with music. That was their form of meditation. They just didn't know it. And so, we're already listening to music. And if you see someone, on their way to work and they've got the music cranked, they're kind of practicing a form of right brain meditation before they go to work. And they just maybe not label it that way. And so, music is a wonderful doorway to getting into right brain processing. Um, and so
That's fascinating. Sometimes you get like music playing in your head, not necessarily some song that is stuck. You heard it and it's stuck for some time, but just some music playing in your mind. Then there is no story. The left brain is shut off. It's just listening to that melody, which is continuously playing. I noticed that a lot. Like, that means that the right brain is more active in that moment than the
I would
left.
say, yeah, I would definitely say so. And that's again, this culture of the Pirahã who are so happy. It's so interesting that the most difficult thing about their language is that they sing. So they sing
Mm-hmm.
their language. And so that really puts it's a right brain. There's such a right brain culture that even it had an effect even on their language. And uh, and it's interesting too because their refusal for stories. They have no theater in the sense where they don't have plays. They just don't have. They have no gossip. And when you start getting into how obsessed we are with stories, you could see it's this kind of the right brain plays out on you're listening to this, and then you get to work, and now work, politics, and got work gossip, and it's all again all these stories. And then, of course, you bring those stories home. And that's why people get so stressed about work because they bring the work home with them, never realizing that it's all just a story.
Mm. I think that left brain is so hungry for attention. It's just unbelievable dragon for attention. Because, if you don't just sit here and listen to a little bit of music, you need to scroll your phone or go on a news or put on TV or something just not to sit and be happy. Because that needs some attention to survive or to exist, or to continue
Yeah,
with this self-illusion.
and Ian McGilchrist, he wrote a really fascinating book, The Master and His Emissary, and he got the story from Nietzsche, and it really fits modern culture. So his book is all about how left-brained modern culture is, and it's all about a kingdom that was run by a very wise king. And so the people were very happy, peace, everything was really wonderful. And it started to get a little bit more, it grew and grew, and it started to get a little more complex. So he had an emissary who would take care of things. But the interesting thing is the emissary got very arrogant, thought it was in control, and sort of started taking over. And of course, that's a story that we've experienced with the peace of the right brain. But then suddenly the left brain now needs attention. It sort of has taken over this need for control, and now it thinks it's running the show. And so it's a really nice story about how modern culture went from this useful tool, this emissary, this is going to help with things, now that helper thinks it's in control. And again, it craves attention because it knows deeply that it's a servant, not a master. And so there's almost this weird left brain insecurity that seems to come across as this need for attention. And we started off a while back, and you were like, "What's awakening?" And I think awakening is recognizing that left brain as a servant. It's just here to help.
Yes. Yeah, and I think the fundamental problem before that voice in the head is the security of feeling safe, because that left brain is about survival. It's talking about I'm looking for things, looking for problems to solve to survive. So it doesn't feel safe. But bringing attention to that you're already safe right here, right now, more and more and more, helps that voice to relax and stop trying to control something that you cannot control anyway. Kind of unplugging the whole process through the noticing that you're already safe.
It's an amazing shift from being in self mode that is continuously worried that something's going to happen to the self, and that puts us in a state of panic and anxiety, to a state of recognizing the self as just a story. When that's recognized, nothing can go wrong. Everything's okay. And you recognize, hey, I'm already safe. There's no I that has to be worried about, and then this is what we see in nature. Trees don't. And if we look at all the other species on the planet, this is what makes us so unique as humans, because we've created language, and language is so much behind all these stories. But all the other species, they're just like the Pirahã. They're in a state of blissful mindfulness, which is to say they're just in conscious reality. So if you look at all the we have some horses next door, and they're just hanging out, and dogs, and people remember that meme. It was pretty funny. It was going around like, why your dog is so much happier than you. And there was this little cloud, and it was like they were worried about this and this. And but the dog's not worrying. The dog's in actual conscious experience. And that's the huge difference between the two.
So it seems like evolution made a mistake, and we are here to correct it.
Yeah, so that's a great question, and it's one I always, when I get to talk to other spiritual teachers, it's one of the questions I really like to put forth. So particularly teachers of non-duality, and say, well, if there's one consciousness, and if there's one non-dualistic consciousness, why do we play dualism? Why do we play that we're all individual, separate selves, and then create a state of panic? And why do it? Why go on this trip? And there's usually like this nonverbal kind of, why we do this. And so non-duality, well, if there's one consciousness, why play? And here Alan Watts gave such a wonderful explanation that comes from, if you see in the Upanishads, and they've dealt with this, and it's this game of being what you're not. There's a great line from Alan Watts. He said, "When it plays at being everything else." And so there's some strange thing in the universe that forgets who it really is, and that's what we're doing. So when I play Chris, I'm forgetting who I really am, which is universal consciousness. And I forget for a little bit. And when I forget, then I take on the story, and I go on a little adventure. And the adventure includes suffering, but and it's the unexpected. Consider for a moment, what if you could know everything? What if you could know what's going to happen the next moment? And then the way I put it in the book, it'd be like, what if you owned a casino and you played in your own casino? I mean, it would be a weird thing, because if you won, you'd lose, and if you lost, you'd win. There's no real way to win. There's no real way to win if you own the casino and you're playing in it. But think about this clever trick we could play. What if I had some way to wipe my memory of who I really am, which is the casino owner? What if I could forget that I'm the casino owner? Now, all of a sudden, it becomes quite an adventure, right? Now I'm like, if I win, it's really winning. And if I lose, then there's always that chance I could lose. And so we play a strange cosmic game of forgetting our true identity. And again, it's the phrase, you're already a Buddha, you're already cosmic consciousness. So in that sense, there's not much you have to do. You kind of win even if you lose. So I like ending the books on some reminder. I call them deminders. Once you eliminate thinking,
I like that. Deminder.
Once you eliminate thinking, it's much easier to see how there's one consciousness, and it's not your consciousness. And so we have this neuroscience view that the brain generates consciousness. And so, of course, my brain is generating my consciousness. But when the story of the self is revealed as illusory, all of a sudden you're like, there's no me having it's just consciousness. It's not mine. It's just awareness.
So what would be your advice to a seeker who is still looking to see that one consciousness?
Sorry, you cut out there for a second.
Oh, okay. What would be your advice to a seeker who is looking to recognize this one consciousness? Other than reading your books, of course.
Yeah, it's a really fun way. Again, when you start getting playful, you realize that it's all play. And it's an act, and so Chris is an act, and Professor is an act, and sadness, and all of that. Because when you get into the game, it's very difficult to do it without categories, and and this is what Taoism has showed us, that you really can't have happiness without sadness, and all these are all connected. And so when we venture off into the game, then categories become part of the play. And there's this recognition, we're as a culture, we're really obsessed with having a good day. I don't know if you've seen that, but you can go to the store. Everyone wants you to have a good day. Have a good day. Have a good day. And without the recognition that bad days make good days, it's all interconnected. And so I just say, have a day. Have the day you were meant to have. And maybe that day includes an enlightening experience. Or maybe it doesn't. My first book, I did a self-published first book, and it had a very long title. It was, The Neurotic's Guide to Avoiding Enlightenment. And
good one.
And my advice was, this thing you're seeking, it's the chase. When you start seeking it, it becomes much more elusive. And so I kind of got this from when I was a kid, like maybe 6 or 7. I had these very interesting moments where nothing seemed very real. I guess in modern psychology, they call these dissociative moments. And as a kid, I really enjoyed them. I thought, wow, this is kind of interesting. And then it eluded me. But as I had those when I got older, I tried to avoid them, and then they got much worse. And so there's a very interesting relationship with chasing after enlightenment, and when it's this chasing after enlightenment that makes it elusive. And and it's just, and we knew this with happiness even, and Viktor Frankl, put it very nicely. He said that uh, I'm going to paraphrase it, but it was our chasing of happiness is what makes it elusive. And there's been a few other people who have caught on to this, like
Mhm.
chasing after happiness makes it disappear. And so it's an acceptance. Oh, actually, and not even acceptance, because then people will say, "Well, I don't know how to accept,"
Mhm,
and
mhm.
that's true. I get
True.
that. So I think it's a recognition of the game, a recognition that if you continuously chase after enlightenment, it's going to be elusive. When you recognize that chasing it makes it elusive, that recognition stops you from chasing it. Once you stop chasing it, you recognize that it's already here. It's the same thing happened with my anxiety. My anxiety was me not wanting to be anxious. So I stopped trying to fight
Chasing.
off anxiety.
Uh-huh.
And as soon as I stopped trying to fight it off, it went away on its own.
Hmm. So I would say that there is game going on and everyone is playing the game, but the game is not that game. The game is to figure out what the real game is. The
That's
real
yeah, that's
game
it. And that's
is
taking one
not what
more.
it seems. It's not
Yeah.
to get what the left brain wants. It's to recognize this machine and to get free from it.
Yeah, that's a nice way to put it too, because there are two games really going. The one is
Mhm.
what the left brain, who wants cars and money and security. And then the other bigger game is the cosmic game, to recognize that we put that in the way just to have some fun with it. See how far out we could take the game. How far could we become what we're not?
Uh-huh.
How far could a universal consciousness, how far could it become what it's not in terms of individual people who are anxious, you know? And
Have
in a
all
sense,
these wars and troubles
yeah,
and
trouble,
distractions and everything.
massive suffering because that's all things that consciousness can't become on its own.
Mhm.
So it has to become what it isn't. And in that sense, it kind of completes itself. I tell people, if you're suffering, if you're anxious, if you're depressed, in a way, you're complete. You're helping the game, and it's interesting. And so if you see your suffering as with a positive light to it, that you're completing uh, universal consciousness, then it actually, again, in an ironic way, it seems to dissipate.
Hmm. Interesting twist. There is a twist in
Yeah,
the story. Yeah. The story goes,
always,
goes, goes, and then what?
always.
Oh, thank you so much, Chris. It's so delightful to talk to you, and I could talk for hours, I guess.
It was fun.
Yeah. Um, and I recommend to get Chris's book, No Self, No Problem, and the other one, which is a workbook with the exercises. And if you resonate with that you need more information for the left brain, you need some scientific explanations, you need to get some information, then this is the information you need. But once you're done with the information, you start looking inside in your own experience, seeing what's going on really here beyond any acquired knowledge. That's the game. And I want to finish with this Rumi quote, which just came in. It says, "Why do you stay in prison when the door is so wide open?" I
Mhm.
love that.
Yeah, it reminded me of something I actually put in one of my first books was, so many of us, we feel like we're imprisoned and like our hands are on the, cell bars and we're trying to get out. And you don't recognize that if you just look behind you, you're on the outside of the prison. You're not even in the inside.
Mm, yeah. Yeah. My book is about gateless gate. Like there is no gate. You're already free. Just
Yeah.
recognize that narrator or the voice in the head, that there is no I. There never was any I. Thank you so much, Chris. And thank you
Oh, thank
everyone
you.
for listening, for watching. Leave some comments, share, and I'll see you in the next episode.
Yeah, sounds awesome.
Thank you. Bye for now.